Hello and welcome back. Today we will have our lecture 3 and we will continue with the biological markers of human evolution and evolution of language. In the previous segment we saw that the primary data, primary analysis from of the biological markers is heavily dependent on analogous and homologous comparisons and how they have informed us about how humans are different and what kind of similarities and dissimilarities we can find. So, today we will start with the markers themselves. There are a few markers of which are called biological markers, which are considered to be essential for the emergence of language among humans. Okay, so, the first we will talk about the gene, the genetic marker, and eventually one after another we will talk about the brain, the larynx, the vocal tract and so on and so forth. So, let us start with the gene, the genetic marker. Now, we have already talked about Darwin and his influence on language evolution theories. Another important name that has shaped genetic understanding, genetics study of genetics among humans is the name of Gregor Johann Mendel. His 1866 work contribute heavily to the understanding of genetics and subsequent research that has looked at mutation as one of the key variants in deciding how the genetics in humans and other species behave. And as a result of Gregor Johann Mendel's influence, a lot of research subsequently followed looked at the genetic mutations. So, one of them is, for example, Hugo de Vries talks about mutation to be the main mechanism of evolutionary change, and thus he looked at it as more important than the natural selection. However, at the same time there are a number of other scientists who prefer the natural selection, because they believe that small mutations, small changes over a period of time do not necessarily give us the big changes that typically are part of evolution. So, the influence of accumulation of numerous mutations had small effects on the phenotype is how they put it. By 1930s, genetic studies became quite popular, and many important studies came out during that time, and as a result of which we see the emergence of neo-Darwinism around this time. This is called neo-Darwin synthesis. Eventually, of course, with more technological progress, genetic studies went down all the way to the biochemical processes within the genetic structure itself. And this is the background within which we look at the genetic underpinning of language and language evolution. One of the most important genes in this regard is that of FOXP2. This is the fork head box, which is shortened into FOXP2, is from the P family, and it is the second gene that was discovered. Now, this gene is the hero of our story, because it is connected to the language capacity in humans. Now, it has a very important function in the system, genetic system, because it has a regulatory role. What does it mean? Regulatory role means this gene also regulates the functioning of many other genes, as a result of which FOXP2 is not responsible only for itself and its expression, but also the expression of other genetic structures. For example, the genes related to I quote, influences many phenotypic attributes, including the morphology of the lungs, the heart, the bowels and the brain. So, that is how important the FOXP2 gene is. Now, for language development, both copies of the gene must be inherited by children. If there is any problem, if they do not inherit it in entirety, or if there is a genetic change, for example, a mutation, there will be repercussions for language. Now, this was not known overnight. There is a very interesting beginning of this entire story with respect to FOXP2 and language capacity. It all started with a family that was found out that to have a number of SLI patients within the same family, and it seemed to be inherited. The family is called KE family. And within a single extended family, there were a number of SLI patients. SLI stands for specific language impairment. Specific language impairment, as the name suggests, is not dependent on any other cognitive disorder or delay or anything. It affects specifically the linguistic capacities. That is why the name. Now, This happened in the 1960s. Later, when FOXP2 was discovered and it was the structure was found out, and then it was possible to connect FOXP2 gene with the language disorder. And eventually, it was understood that there was a mutation in the FOXP2 gene that caused the disorder. Eventually, of course, there were further studies in this. So, this finding with the family and subsequently the understanding of the structure of FOXP2 gene and how the mutation of the gene can affect language disorder, this was the beginning of connecting language as a faculty with genetic structure per se. So, this was the beginning. And of course, today the studies have been more and more fine tuned, and today scientists warn that even though FOXP2 has a very important role to play, it is not a single gene that decides how language evolution probably took place. It is it's kind of polygenetic in nature. The influence is polygenetic in nature, which means that more than one gene is probably related to the development of language. Now, this FOXP2 gene also has figured in a large number of publications in terms of whether it was intricately and inherently a human thing, or is it available in other primates, higher primates, as well as our other ancestors like the Neanderthals and Denisovans and so on and so forth. So, a large number of studies took place in the 2000s. In fact, there was a project called Neanderthal project, which looked at these issues at a much more critical level. So, initial finding, for example, Leonard said that this is a specifically human gene, and then this, as a result of which this idea was used by the saltationists to claim that language appeared suddenly. Saltationists claimed that language appeared out of nowhere, there was no evolution, there was no nothing, just appeared one suddenly at some time in the evolutionary history. So, and they connected the sudden appearance of language with the mutation of the FOXP2 gene. So, this is how it was seen around that time, but eventually much much more findings came out in the open, and it was found out that even Neanderthals did share a kind of some derivatives of the same FOXP2 gene. So, as a result of which the idea that Neanderthals possibly had language also took shape. So, not only the primates, but also at the level there are homology FOXP2 homology available in terms of at the gene level between humans and even bird songs. So, these are some important findings that are quoted here. There are not only in humans, but Neanderthals and as well as bird songs we find the traces of the same gene. In fact, the Neanderthal debate also brought out in the open that similar kind of mutations are also found among the Neanderthals. Okay, so, this was some quite a groundbreaking finding. So, this was completed in 2010. It brought to light that 99.7% of the base pairs. Now, what is this base pair? All of us know that humans are similar to the other higher primates at genetic level at up to 99%. So, the 1% difference that exists actually has millions of genetic material. So, within that we share a large number of similarities with Neanderthals and others for example, Denisovans. So, if that much of similarity exists between modern humans, that is Homo sapiens, and the Neanderthals and Denisovans, there must have been much more than just appearance and other things. So, FOXP2 played a very important role there. So, which meant that the genetic blueprint of these species is remarkably similar. So, the specific genes which are responsible for speech, language and cognition support this assumption that because these are also found among the other our near cousins. So, this was found not only in one specimen, but across specimens of Neanderthals found in different places. For example, Neanderthal specimen from Spain as well as from the Altai mountain in the Siberian region. So, this is so there are all these important findings, all these important papers, there are many more that talks about how the FOXP2 is not a uniquely human phenomenon, it also was shared by Neanderthals, and as a result of which they probably had language. So, anybody who is interested to read up more on this, I have added the references. This is a rather lengthy debate and very interesting and landmark papers are out there, you can read up. we will move on to brain structure. Now, at the genetic level, of course, now we know that there is at least one gene which is responsible for the language evolution to take place. Whether we share it with Neanderthals or not with others, it is not that important. What is important is that there is some genetic underpinning to linguistic capacity. Similarly, the brain structure. Brain structure, as today we all know that there are certain areas in the human brain which are called language areas. The most important of them are Broca's area, Wernicke's area, and also we have the auditory cortex and then the sensory motor cortex, who all come together to help us speak and understand. Now, monkeys and non-human apes are equipped with homologous subcortical circuits, and songbirds subcortical circuits are analogous to us, right, but they do not represent the homologous structures. Recent imaging studies also show that apes and humans share similarity in the brain region, which is the BA44 is Brodmann area 44, which largely corresponds to Broca's area. But the finding that we share Broca's area with many other higher primates as well as other animals does not mean they do the same function. The most important finding in this regard is that in spite of the similarity of the region, they have differences in terms of function. So, they differ not only in size and grade of laterality, but also cytoarchitecture and cortical connectivity. So, even though it might look like the same regions are shared, the function differs due to all of these features. Now, in case of apes, this particular area, this Brodmann area 44, which is Broca's area, is corresponds to sophisticated gestures, and for human this is responsible for language, primarily language production, because we all know that in case of a problem with the Broca's area, we will have a problem with articulation. So, because it is connected to the articulation of speech. So, on the other hand, this is responsible for sophisticated gestures in the apes. Now, early hominids did have a structure responding to Broca's area. However, over time this area has gone through a lot of changes. What kind of changes? As we just saw that even though higher primates have the same Broca's area, in their case it is used for gestures, sophisticated gestures. Now, in case of the early hominids, this Broca's area existed, however, the functioning was not as fine tuned as it is today. For example, scientists believe that Neanderthals did not have adequate control of the tongue. Tongue is a muscle. So, in order for us to use the tongue to produce complex speech sounds and combine them as well, we need a very sophisticated control mechanism, which is what Neanderthals probably did not have as per as many researchers. And another problem is that we do not really know when the change happened, at what stage during evolution the change from being sort of an archaic system to a fine tuned sophisticated system, when did that happen, that we are not very sure about. So, another thing about with respect to brain that has been found out recently, that has been talked about a lot, is the capacity of which is called modern language computational capacity. Now, just having the brain, that is the hardware is not enough, you have to have the software as well, which is what to put it very simply, which is called the MLCC, modern language computational capacity. Now, this is based on neurobiological substrates. So, you need to have the hardware in place and on which you use the software, much like you need the certain kind of configuration of your PC to load certain software, something of that sort to make things easily understandable. Now, as humans progressed from our early hominids to the modern human to the Homo sapiens, this feature also underwent certain changes, and findings today suggest that early hominids did have a primordial aspect of the same capacity, which they have called PMLCC, a precursor to the MLCC, which was responsible for basic compositionality for symbolic, vocal and gestural signals. So, there was some amount of computational ability among the early hominids, but which was primordial, which later on developed into what is called the MLCC, modern language computational capacity. So, the brain, when you talk about the brain as a brain structure as a biological marker, we mean both the size of the Broca's area as well as the connectivity, cytoarchitecture as well as the computational capacity. Of course, we cannot get into more detail because of brevity of time. Now, we move on to the third biological underpinning, which is the vocal tract, which is more visible, more what do you call it, more easy to understand. So, the vocal tract, as we all know, it is responsible for producing the speech sound. So, even if you have the genetic capacity and you have the brain structure and the software in place, you need the instrument to create the speech sounds, with that instrument is our vocal cord. Now, the vocal cord has a particular mechanism which is called the source filter model, on the basis of which it functions. What is that model? It is there has to be consistent airflow, there has to be vibration to create the sound waves, and though some mechanism to create modification of their sound, that sound structure, as well as to have a combination of various kinds of sounds, so that you have a large inventory of sounds in language. So, first and foremost the airflow, then the vibration, then the combination of these things to create the language that we speak. Now, humans are not the only species. So, as a result of that, vocal tract is not, we are not the only ones endowed with a vocal tract, many other species also have the vocal tract. So, everybody is aware of the bird songs, we also know about dolphins cries that are considered to be pretty sophisticated, similarly whales and many other animals also have some sort of some vocalization or the other, and which is not very simple. Some of them are simple, some of them are slightly complex, but nothing as complex as human speech. As a result of which there has to be something special about the human vocal tract, which is capable of doing what the other species are not capable of doing, right. So, at an abstract level, human language, as we have already talked about, is characterized by what we call design features, which may or may not have a parallel in any other vocalization. As of today, as we stand today with the knowledge that we have so far, we can say that we have not found similar complexity, but there is no guarantee that we will not find. So, today as of today, we do not see any other species having the similar level of complexity. Secondly, at the level of speech sounds, we have a wide range of possibilities, and those sounds can combine, as we have just said. So, the main differences then is this. So, the vocal tract in humans is not a uniform tube like structure. The position of the larynx within the vocal tract is different from other species. Our larynx is much lower than the other species, and another important thing is the functional division of the vocal tract into two subtracts, which is the right angle bend, which is specific to humans, right. So, this is what characteristic of human vocal cord is. So, the differences can be looked at like this. So, in most mammals, the larynx is located high enough in the throat to be engaged in the nasal passages, enabling simultaneous breathing and swallowing of fluids. This is one of the most important difference between the human vocal tract and other animals vocal tract. The larynx is much higher among the other species, and that allows them to breathe and swallow at the same time. But that is not the case with humans, because our larynx is much lower. We have the risk of choking on food if we try to speak at the same time or breathe also. That is why choking is a common incident among humans. And this is also the case with the younger children. So, infants also have the larynx which is pretty high. It starts to lower around the 3 months of age, and after that it keeps on lowering until we get the optimal position. So, the lowered adult larynx sits at the bottom of a shared single tube, down which both food and air travel. That is why we have the incidence of choking. In fact, this has been utilized as an argument for evolution, because a particular biological feature to have evolved to be like this, which results in some accidents, must have a greater benefit. What is that benefit? In our case, this is considered to be the use of language. So, we could speak, and so choking could be a collateral damage of some sort. That is the idea here. So, thus the vocal tract is another important biological physiological adaptation that is thought to be responsible for humans' ability to speak. Now, human vocal tract is different from our closest cousins among higher primates. This puts us at a risk, but we have already talked about this, right. Now, based on these 3-4 characteristic features, biological features among humans, which enables apparently enables us to speak language, has been utilized to have number of theories, and there are as well as there are arguments. So, the different theories and arguments based on the biological endowment. So, let us look at some of those arguments. Now, these arguments have come from a large number of disciplines, as we have already seen before, that there are so many domains from which language evolution is studied. So, they are linguistics, anthropology, psychology, evolutionary biology, and so on and so forth. Now, where is the problem, where is the split? So, the primary split is whether there was an evolutionary leap leading to discontinuity between humans and other primates. As we have already seen that FOXP2 was shared, even some of the mutations are shared by Neanderthals, the vocal tract is there in among others with some differences and so on and so forth, similarly brain region. So, was there a continuity between other species and humans, or was there an evolutionary leap? Suddenly humans started speaking while others were left behind. That is one of the debates. Secondly, is language primarily used for communication or for structuring thought? These are the two types of debates that we have within the biological markers idea. So, first and foremost the saltationist view. Saltationist view primarily says that language appeared suddenly because there was a particularly favorable genetic situation, which is the mutation of the FOXP2. The names that you can see are some of them, there are many others, but some of the most influential scholars of our time have taken the saltationist view that language appeared suddenly. Chomsky and many of his collaborators are there in this list. So, Berwick and Chomsky takes an all or nothing stance on this, that is it appears suddenly. On the other hand, Miyagawa's approach allows some amount of continuity. So, even within the saltationist view there are two types, some of them favor a sudden approach, all or nothing kind of a sudden approach. On the other hand, Miyagawa gives some amount of evolutionary continuity, allows certain amount of continuity. So, Chomsky and Berwick maintain that syntax evolved in entirety suddenly. Now, why this idea is based on Chomsky's theory that syntax is the most important thing about language. So, if you to have language is to have syntax, that is the kind of equivalence that Chomsky and his followers draw. As a result of which, when you say that humans started speaking, means they started having syntax. So, he does not have any proto language or proto form of syntax is not allowed in his theory. So, he says that suddenly it appeared facilitated by a single biological event like a mutation. So, as a result there could not have been any proto form, there could not have been a simpler syntax. According to them, the simplest assumption, hence the one we adopt, is that the generative procedure emerged suddenly as the result of a minor mutation. There is no room in this picture for any precursor to language, say a language like system with only short sentences, I quote. So, according to them, mathematical acumen needed to understand evolution was not there with Darwin. In fact, they find fault with many other people saying that they did not have the required quality. On the other hand, they provide a solution for this. For this, they have this idea of strong minimalist thesis and they propose it as the only serious way to understand the evolution of language, where syntax reduces to a single operation called merge. So, they propose the operation of merge, which takes care of the sudden appearance of syntax, which in turn appeared because of a biological facilitation in the form of FOXP2 mutation. They also have made many other claims. Most of them boil down to the simple fact that none of the evidence provided by the other group is good enough. Either they are not theoretically strong or they do not have the acumen to talk about them. In one of his most important papers by Hauser and Chomsky's group, they have talked about two kinds of faculty of language in the broad sense FLB and language in the narrow sense FLN. While FLB designates processes that are shared with other animals and thus are involved in language and other sensory motor and conceptual intentional processes, and FLN in contrast describes the processes that are uniquely human. So, this is the human language that here they are talking about. Now, there is this funny argument between Chomsky's group and the other group. In terms of according to Chomsky and his group, they say that in order for syntax to be evolvable, it has to be simple. And since it has to be simple, it must have arisen out of a single minor mutation. This circular entangled argument has been called as Chomsky is not by Rogovac. On the other hand, we have Miyagawa, who talks about saltationism with some amount of continuity. The primary thesis of Miyagawa is that there is a coming together of vocal system and expressive system together to create human language. How he goes about is that he says that that language did not suddenly appear in its full glory, it did not suddenly just sprung into existence. He proposes what is called the integration hypothesis as an alternative idea of the strong saltationist. This says that human language evolved out of two distinct systems coming together, the lexical system which is similar to the alarm calls in monkeys, and the expressive systems like the bird song. So, in case of alarm calls in monkeys, he says that these are like lexical items, different calls for different kinds of entities. So, monkey calls do have different kind of reference, real reference. So, one kind of animal, one kind of call like that. So, hence he calls them lexical system. On the other hand, bird song is not called a lexical system because it is just some sort of a according to him it is just some sort of a patterns of melody without any specific lexical meaning. Now, independently these two systems have evolved for millions of years, and then finally it integrated into human language somewhere around 100,000 years ago. That is the idea. Now, this way he takes a middle path in some sense, and he takes care of how human language could emerge suddenly. Now, there are many problems with his theory. One of them is that it is not clear why the precursor to human language took millions of years to emerge and human language appeared suddenly, because remember Miyagawa also is part of the saltationist group. So, there is no answer to it as to why suddenly this coming together happened and humans started speaking. Secondly, there is a issue of correlation between human language and the monkey call and bird songs. So, if human language is a combination of bird song and monkey call, there should be some sort of a correlation between these two. So, that also is not there. For example, in the questions that have been raised is, in what way does bird song truly correspond to the functional and grammatical components of human language, and how this monkey call mapped onto vocabulary of human language, because that is human vocabulary is much larger than monkey call. So, that is how do you account for that, that is another question. And then what were the evolutionary forces, why did it even happen, that is another question, and what kind of modifications were needed in the human brain to enable these are questions. And thirdly, the other set of questions that have been asked, that according to Miyagawa the two components are simple. Both bird songs and monkey calls are simple structures, but human language is a complex structures. So, how and why this would happen, that two simple structures would come together and then will create a complex structure, that also has been questioned by many scholars, for example, Tallerman and Progovac. So, they find the idea fascinating. This is interesting idea, however, the mapping somehow is not very satisfactory, so to say. So, this has been as a result not been fully approved by the scholarly community. So, this is where we stop with the this segment. We will take up the other parts in the next lecture. Thank you.